So go ahead and have fun.
What we're going to do is tell you a little bit about web velocity this morning, and then James is going to go take over and give you a demonstration of it. The projector?
No, you. Adjust your focus.
Maybe it's last night.
Okay, so what we're going to see is the what, how, and why of web velocity, what's it all about, and then go into a demonstration. So what is it, how is it different, and why should you be interested? I even have a few surprises. So what is it? Web velocity is a development environment for developing really nice, powerful web applications. It lets you actually build the applications in a browser using a lot of tools. Of course, since it uses Seaside, you can do all kinds of Ajax and comment, all the power that Seaside brings to the table, plus more. So what's under the hood in web velocity? Kind of technically, here are some of the components, the basic components that are in it. It's based on VisualWorks Smalltalk with the Seaside framework, also an OR mapping framework, GLORP, and a good bit of infrastructure and tools, scaffolding, active record. You may recognize some of those names from the Rails world. And indeed, it's very, very similar or analogous to those. So how is it different? Many of you are probably familiar with Seaside. If not, just briefly, Avi Bryant, the creator of Seaside, calls it the heretical web framework because it takes a different approach, and which often turns out better, such as not passing around state, it keeps state on the server, and the control flow is much more like regular programming rather than the more disjointed control flow of traditional web programming. So we added on the object relational mapping so we could do the same type of applications that Rails addresses, going from your database to a web application really quick and easy. So if you want to build acronym CRUD applications quick and easy, this will do it for you. And the tools, you can use some of the regular Smalltalk browsers if you're familiar with those, or a lot of the tools are right in the browser. So you can literally develop the entire thing and debug it right in the browser. And James will be showing you a lot of those things. So this might be a little bit of a surprise in the, okay, why should you be interested? It's not for you. What? Web velocity is not actually targeted at Smalltalkers, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be interested, and I'll tell you why. If you're on a Cincom Smalltalk license, basically you'll get all the pieces that are in web velocity, save some of the hand-holding tools and web tools to assemble applications. You'll have all the underlying pieces that you as knowledgeable Smalltalk developers can build the same type of applications. So who is web velocity aimed at? It is aimed at it's aimed at the non-Smalltalk community. And if you saw my presentation yesterday, one of our main goals is to help grow the Smalltalk community. And web velocity is one of the vehicles that we have in our arsenal to try to do that. So for introducing this to new customers, it bypasses the language wars obstacle. I know I worked for years in sales at Park Place, in a number of roles, and one of the first obstacles you ran into in the sales cycle was when you brought in something like VisualWorks and they saw it was Smalltalk. The first thing was, okay, is Smalltalk the language? And good, bad, or ugly, I mean, no matter what the language, whether it's no matter what the language, it's a debate that reaches a religious-like fervor. Because no matter what, it's a very polarized. You're going to get a lot of people all over on different sides of the coin as to, is this a good language or a bad language, no matter what the language is. So you're always going to run into a big obstacle if you go in language first into a sales cycle. So this kind of bypasses the language war. You want to do web applications? Great tool. You can build all kinds of things. It scales. It's got proven technology under the hood. And you can script out your applications. And the thing is, when they're scripting their applications, as you'll see in James' presentation, you're doing it in small talk, but it gives you examples and does so much hand-holding. Anybody can do it. They kind of just fill in some of the blanks, the templates, and they build up their application. So the nice thing is they're doing small talk, but they don't even know they're doing small talk. They're just kind of doing some scripting. And as they want to get deeper and deeper into it, they're learning small talk. So this is a stealth approach to growing the small talk community. So why should you be interested? Well, if for example, your organization, you have a small talk group and then all these other groups who don't use it, maybe this product could be recommended to them and help grow the use of small talk within your organization. Because when they get started with it, they get some success under their belt, they want to go deeper and deeper. Maybe they ask your organization for some help in expanding the use of small talk, and we again stealthily grow the use of small talk in the organization. So, now that we've told you about it, we're going to, it's the tell part of the tell and show. James is going to take over and give you a demonstration of the product.
First thing we have to do is turn off this atrocious display option. First, I have to get this back into mirrored mode because
F7. Just hit F7.
just hit F7. Ah. That's why I carry him around. All right, let's see if it'll go back to 1024. It was okay. There we go. All right, so we get out of that. Get out of that. I'll take that under advisement. All right, so did I? Oh gosh, okay, so it's not here. Where? Okay, so if you were the terminal, where would you be?
Utilities, command shift U.
You can tell I'm an old. You can tell I'm an old Unix guy here. All right, so I'm going to bring up the velocity environment, and for a moment you saw a VisualWorks launcher come up, and then you saw it disappear. And the reason for that is that the velocity environment actually lives for the most part in the browser. So if you see, how many of you have seen any of the videos or screencasts we put up on this? Okay, so you've seen some pieces of this before. You're going to see a little more involved demo this morning. Basically, though, what you've got here is a Smalltalk environment in the browser. We've tried to make this a little simple and more approachable, and I think this is more approachable in many ways, even notwithstanding whether you're a beginner or not. Over here on the left, you have any applications that are already installed. In the middle, I have access to my source code repository. Notice that all of the complexity of something like store has been pushed off. The available applications are listed. If I click on one, like let's take one that has a version history, I will get version 1.1 here, and it'll tell me what I've got. I've got version 1.0 here. It'll tell me what I've got. So I could just click to load that. All I'd have to do is click on it. Over here, I've got documentation. So I can come over here and click on something like Smalltalk, and I get a reference manual. I can find out, well, I'd really like to know more about this announcements package thing. So I can click on that. I want to find out about class announcer. I can go in there. It'll give me documentation on the instance variables. I can jump back up here to Object, and notice that I can jump at any point back to where I was along this trail. So I've got kind of a simple way of going through documentation, and I can go through the system fairly quickly and easily. The idea is to make it easy to find stuff. As far as building applications, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to build something that doesn't even use a database, just to show you how the tool works. So I'm going to click on this Create New Application, and I'm going to call this Hello World, because we're going to take the canonical example first. And now I've just gone ahead and created an application. Under the hood, if you're familiar with Cincom Smalltalk, I've created a package. That package could then be pushed into store. In terms of this tool, I have here the point where I would put in presumably some documentation, and this whole area here is to encourage me to do so. Being a standard Smalltalk developer, I'm going to willfully ignore that. And I'm going to come over here and say that what I really want is a new component. Now notice the options here. I can build a new class, meaning it doesn't have anything to do with the web, it's just some domain class. New persistent model, that would have to do with building something that is going to expect to go back into a database. How many of you know what active record means? That's the pattern that's going to be used, is an active record kind of pattern. A new web component, if you're familiar at all with Seaside, you know what that is. That'll be a subclass of WA component. I'm going to come in here and say, well, I'd like this to be called Hello. I'm going to call it Hello 3 because of the fact that I have actually saved this kind of thing before in the repository. So I'm going to say register that as an application, and immediately it creates my class, my application. Notice that it comes off WA component. I have entry points already. I can come over here and do that. Notice it doesn't do anything. Well, that's because subclassing from WA component, it's got default rendering. The default rendering is that it does nothing. So I'll go back over here to the actual class, and I'll go to the source code. And now I can come down here, and there's my render content on. If you look at the code there, you can see that it's not doing anything, but it does have a little suggestion. So let's take HTML heading level 3 with, now let's take this out and put it to Hello World. And let's notice how it's highlighting the mistakes. So if I left that double quote there, it's going to tell me that I have a mistake. So I'm going to now hit Control S, and that accepts that code, so it works like a browser. Now if I go back over here to my application and I just refresh, there it is. So I've got my basic Hello World web component up, not doing anything terribly exciting yet, but you notice that I was able to build it and work with it completely here. So let's do something stupid with this. Let's change this so that it says HTML text, let's say quote 3 plus 4. No. And I forgot to put the semicolon there. So I will accept that even though that's completely illegal code. But the reason I'm doing that is I want to show you something. So I'm going to go back over to entry points and launch that again. And if you've worked with Seaside at all, you've seen this debug. What you haven't seen is this. There's my debugger in the browser. So I can come down here to the stuff I recognize. And notice that it's highlighting the code that's broken. So I will change that to a single tick there. Notice it highlights that in red to tell me you've got a problem. So I've got syntax-aware code. And now I will come through here and find the button, which is down here at this point, and say continue. And now notice that it's still broken because strings don't understand plus. So I'll again go into the debugger, find my code again, and I'll change that to a comma. Hit Control S and hit play. So it works. So I wrote an application, made a classic software development mistake where I willfully ignored the error messages that the system was telling me about because being a small talker I know better, and then it blew up on me. And when it blew up on me, I didn't have to context switch. This is the benefit that we've always had in Smalltalk. When you're debugging an application, you don't have to context switch. You go from your application instead of being the forensic pathologist trying to figure out what killed the guy, you are the surgeon trying to patch him up. Well, all of those benefits that exist in a client-server world have now been translated to the web. Again, no context switch. I go to the browser, I stay in the browser. I'm in the environment, I don't switch my focus. So let's go back out here, and I'll go back to the base launcher here. So we'll get rid of that and go all the way back out to the top. And notice here this is bolded. The reason that's bolded is because the environment is telling me you haven't published this. Now here's the real complex part of this. To publish this, and I made the same mistake a couple of times when I did screencasts, I forgot that to publish I right-click. Notice the options here. One of the options is publish. One of the other options is deploy. If I hit deploy, what will happen is it'll take the parcel there and drop it out into a well-known directory name. And if I start the server environment up, it will just auto-load it at start. And if I put the server in deployment mode, which I would show you, except that's not quite working yet, it would take the launcher off. So I'm going to hit publish just to show you that. So it's telling me that I have version 1.0. I have my comment. This should be a comment. Hit OK. And it's telling me that there's a version 1.0 out there. So I will change that to 1.1. And hit OK. And now you notice that this thing is no longer bolded over here. It's busy publishing. Did I get an exception over there, or is that? Oh, there it is. So this is no longer bolded, meaning it's been published. And notice it's now in the list available here as 1.1, published today. So if I open this up, there it is. So I've now built an application. I've published it, and I could load it, but I think you'll just take my word for that for the moment. Let's create a new application, though. Let's go ahead and create something a little more interesting. I'll create a database one. And I'm going to come down here to the database tab. And now, since I'm working with a database application, I now have to actually specify what database I'm going to use. It turns out that I have Postgres on this machine. So just to show you that that is in fact there, I'll go ahead and open up pgadmin. And there it is. And I will connect. And if I open up the tables, you'll notice that there is no table called post and there is no table called comments. So that's just to show you that in fact there's nothing up my sleeve before I get started. So let's go ahead and say, what database do I want to use? I want to use Postgres. Notice there's a rather lengthy list of database options here. I'll select Postgres. I then have to come in and say, well, where is it? Localhost :5432 _ Postgres. The schema and my username, I'm going with the default. And then if I do this, I think this doesn't actually, no, it did. Last night it was being wonky on me. It says database configured, so now everything's working. I can now come over here and say, well, I'd like to add a new persistent model. And notice I'm going to leave all of these things checked. Notice the checkboxes. When I build a persistent model, by default, it'll give me an editor, it'll give me a viewer, it'll give me a list viewer, which is kind of a table grid type thing. So I'm going to create a class called post. And there it is down there. Notice I got all the viewers. It also is encouraging me to do test-driven development, which I will willfully ignore this morning because I'm a marketing guy and I can barely understand all this stuff. So let's go over here and create a new one. And we'll say another new persistent model, comment, and we'll hit OK. So now I've got post and comment. Let's go back to the database schema, though. It turns out that if I want to actually use the database, I have to go over to the source code and give it a little bit of information. So you notice that it already generated some stubs for me. Table for comments, table for posts. What I do have to do is fill some of this in. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to highlight all this stuff and get rid of it. And it knows about the ID. Remember I said this is an active record style pattern, so it's assuming there's an ID in the database. and that's going to be a serial number. So I'm going to follow the same pattern here, a table, create field named. I'm going to say, oh, title, type is platform varchar 200. And then I'm going to come down and give it another one of these. Create field named. And we'll call this content. Type is platform text. And finally, table create field named, oh, created. And type for that is platform timestamp. And now I will hit, oh, I'm making my own rules here. So I'll hit Control S on that, and now I can do, oh, actually, you know what? I put that under comments. Let's go ahead and copy paste that out. I put that in the wrong spot, so we'll come down here, put that in there. And now for comments, I can just take out the title, but I want to change this to posted by, and that should be varchar 200, so let's change that. Okay, and now the other thing I want to do here is I want to have a foreign key relationship between the comment and post table, so I can actually set that up. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say, let's give this post underscore ID gets assigned, and I'm using my cheat sheet here, so if I look down it's because I can't possibly remember all this stuff under pressure. A table create.
When you first came up, there were all examples, templates of doing all these things already in there.
Right.
That's examples.
So I'm creating another relationship here, and it's telling me it's red, so I've done something wrong. Post ID, A table, oh, A table create field named, post ID, type, platform, integer. What did I do? Okay. Oh, I know why. Because unlike the standard browser, it doesn't actually do this for me, so I have to do this. So that's a little annoying, and that'll be fixed before we go to shipment. But having done that, I now have to go ahead and create the foreign key relationship. So a table, add foreign key from post underscore ID to, oh, it's self table named posts field named ID. And now I hit Control S on that. Now, that was a little bit of drudgery to watch, I'll admit. But what I can do now is I can come back out to the database here, and now I can go to the database schema. And what I can do, if I go over here to source code, one of the things I can do is hit this recreate tables option. And now what it's doing is it's creating the tables for me. So if I go over here to Postgres again, you'll notice that what happened here, I'll connect. Notice there are two more tables. There's now a post table and a comments table, so it went ahead and created that stuff for me. So those got created for me. Now, I can go down to these, and you'll notice that one thing I didn't do is I don't have any instance variables for these, but if I go to mappings, it's going to make a recommendation for me. It's going to tell me, by the way, I think you really ought to have this variable. I think you really ought to have this one. I think you really ought to have that one. So I can add all of those things. Okay, and now I can go over to comment, and I can do the same thing. It's going to tell me, I think you ought to have this one, and I think you ought to have this one. So I can add those variables directly to it. Now if I go over to entry points, let's go ahead and go into posts, and I can hit new. My first post. And there it is. And if I go here, notice I have an edit option. I can edit that. Now, from this point, I could go through and I can customize things like CSS. I can go through and I can customize the framework. So let me show you, instead of plowing through more of this demo, and I could show you how to add the comments and hook that up. But let me go back out to this point here. And let's go to, all the way back out to my blog server. And let's go to something like Post View UI. So I can go to source code. And notice here that I've got, under rendering, I don't have any methods here, but I can come up here to visibility and say I want to go up the chain. I have this generic view UI, and this is where all of the various rendering is. So notice that it automatically understands how to put things out in JSON. So if I need to have interoperability to send messages across to some other kind of system, it understands how to put Atom out right off, so you have syndication capability. I have this initial request method here, so I can have an URL that is static, and that's how I got that post.html, so I can have an URL that looks normal instead of having that funky seaside URL that somebody has to come in on. You have something that looks like a normal URL. And if I want to go up again to the visibility, I can go up to generic UI, and there's a whole bunch of other rendering methods here. Notice this thing sketching out. So I have a whole bunch of things, render actions on, render details on. And this is the point where I would probably want to override. If I had that blog editor, blog view rather, I probably do not want some kind of tabular listing for that. I would probably want to override that and have it display in more of a list form with maybe horizontal rules between things. Putting that kind of code out is not something that I'm greatly skilled at yet, so I'm not going to try to break that in front of you. But you can see where you can go in to modify this. If I want to modify the view, the scaffolding is very easy to deal with. So I could come up here to render details on, and I could change this in my subclass pretty easily. So if I wanted just to do something simple, I can take and copy all of this out, and then I could go back down to my class, and under rendering, I could change this. Notice that it's assuming that this is probably what I want to change. It's assuming I probably want to change render details on, because in reality, I don't necessarily want its view of things. So I can change that pretty quickly. Now, before I go on with anything else, I did tell Michael that I would play a video for him. Of course, this assumes that I can figure out where it's saved. So if you hang on for a second, I'll try to find, I think this is even it. Yeah, there we go. So let's see. I don't know if this will be loud enough for you to hear.
Hello, Smalltalk Solutions in Reno. I'm sorry I can't be there with you to give my presentation, but I've been told that I'm being replaced by two people, two for the price of one. So hopefully the presentation will be really good. And I really wish I was there with all of you. Unfortunately, I had other commitments, so enjoy the presentation, and if you want to get involved in the Web Velocity beta afterwards, talk to James or Arden. Yeah, have a look at my blog. I post on my blog fairly frequently about Web Velocity and other things I'm doing in Smalltalk. So, and stay tuned to James Robertson's blog as well. He likes to talk about Web Velocity and Smalltalk in general. So hopefully the presentation goes well, and if it doesn't, then it's not my fault because I'm not there. And I hope you all enjoy it. Bye.
So, with that, I'll open it up to questions.
What version is this that you're running, James?
It's the latest beta that you can actually get if you want to be part of the beta program. Just talk to Arden or I after the talk, and we can try to get that set up. I know there's at least one person in this room who's on that beta program. I don't know if he's had time to download the beta, but it's out there. You can grab it. So you can get it. That's the build that was put out last week. There should be a new build coming out this week.
James, is there any plan to support DB2?
Was it?
I didn't see it on the list.
I think the main thing with DB2 has to do with the fact that we have DB2 support at the lowest level in terms of EXDI. There has to be added both the basic glorp support, and then of course the active record stuff should be fairly seamless once the glorp support is in. I think that's probably something we're interested in. I don't have an absolute commitment on that, but Andreas seems to have a thought. Is he? Okay. So there's your answer.
Sorry, I didn't hear it.
It's being worked on. Over there.
I have two questions. When will the beta program be done? When will it be live? Do you have any idea? I won't hold you to it.
To some extent, I don't know. And the reason I say I don't know is that last year, as many of you know, we did a beta program for Object Studio. And when we started that, we didn't really have a good feel for how long it would be from initial beta to release. And that was largely driven by things we discovered during the beta, which Andreas could speak to in much more detail than I can. But there were things that we thought were right that weren't. There were things that came up during testing because developers tend to try things, people trying to build applications try things that the initial developers didn't think of. So I can't tell you how long the beta is. We're hopeful that we will be able to have something that is closer to production by the end of summer. I mean, it would be ideal if we could announce something by ESUG, but I'm not going to commit to that date. That's just, if everything lined up and the stars were all in the sky in the right order, I'd say ESUG would be a great time for us to have a launch, but I can't commit to that. And if I tried to commit to it, Arden would probably hurt me.
The other question is, how easy is it to slide into the regular VisualWorks environment and start,
Well,
for a new small talker, to cut the teeth on web velocity and then move into VisualWorks, how easy is it?
Well, ultimately, the environment is actually here. So if I come back over here to the actual launcher that was up here, I can actually open a system browser, and all the stuff is here. So if I really wanted to go back to standard Smalltalk, I can get to it. As far as how hard it is to slide from this environment back to this one, that's a good question. I don't really know the answer. That's one of the things I'm hoping to find out.
Are you going to make it easy for developers to build in like CSS tools or to have CSS tools so that they can do the presentation design also?
Well, interesting that you should ask that. If you go to, actually, I don't think it's quite public yet. I will probably be linking to this shortly. Some of Georg's folks have been working on a tool that does exactly that. And he's got a screencast that is, it's not public yet, right?
There is one public which I showed yesterday.
Okay.
So there's a website called seabreeze.e.de that does it for vanilla seaside.
So let me go.
Another internal thing that shows the connectivity to that velocity, and that's not.
Oh, it would help if I put myself actually online. So, this whole connectivity thing. So first it's going to prompt me for a password, so I can't get there. But that is the address, even though it's not going up there right now, but that is the address. So assuming that I were hooked up, that's where you would go.
Are you going to have Ajax library integration too?
Actually, Ajax is already hooked up. If you go into Seaside, all of this stuff in the browser that I was showing you over here, let's bring that back up. If I go back to the launcher, all of these tools were actually Ajaxified. And all of that is exposed, and you can do that whether you're in Web Velocity or just standard Seaside. That's all using the Scriptaculous, and I think some of this might even be using MooTools, because we've integrated MooTools, and that's being released back out to the Seaside community because we're not the only ones working on that. So the thing is that all this stuff is hooked up with Ajax, and working with Ajax in Seaside is not terribly difficult. You load the appropriate Smalltalk library, and where I was writing things like HTML text colon, you write things like HTML updater callback, blah.
Like it says, you can actually also type CSS into the code editor like it's code.
Yes. Oh, is he online now?
Live streaming it, so he's hearing this right now.
Oh, is he hearing it?
Yeah.
Tell him that it's no longer Troy's fault, it's his.
Okay.
Anything else? Yeah, that's something I haven't played with myself, which is part of why I haven't shown it. But the thing is that he's written extensions so that you can write CSS inline in the web browsing environment here. Not the way you would in Seaside, where you write a style method and put it in single quotes. You write CSS like it's code.
And it does highlighting and shows
It does. If you actually know CSS, which any of you who have seen me attempt to play with that on my blog know that I'm not the person that knows CSS. If you know CSS, you can do wonderful things. So if you get a graphics designer that knows what he's talking about, you can have it look nice.
Will there be tutorials and such for the relatively complete idiot to start on this?
Yes, and in fact, if you come over here to this documentation area, you'll notice that if I click on this, the first thing it says is there are no guides currently available. The thing we're going to try to put in here, well, actually I shouldn't say try, the thing we're going to put in here are going to be guides for these general areas. So anywhere you look up there, whether it's Smalltalk extensions, database, security, and so on, there will be a guide there, and that guide will be in the form of something like a screencast, and also regular HTML documentation. And some of that is just, if I come over here and click on Smalltalk, you notice that guides is one thing, and that would be probably things like tutorials and or screencasts. There's also the API reference that I was walking through before. So you have two levels of that. You have an API reference, and interestingly enough, this API reference didn't involve us writing new documentation. It turns out that if you go through the Smalltalk system, there's an astonishing amount of documentation inherent in the system. It's just never been extracted in an easy to access fashion. It's always been the case that you open up the RB or the browser, you hit the comment tab, you go to the comments for each individual method. It's never been pulled out in any kind of easy to access way. Whereas if I go here and say, well, let's take a look at announcements, I have the package comment, let's take a look at this particular class, I have the instance variables, all of these methods. So I have this method and it gives me all of those things with the comments that are in the method. So it pulls all that stuff out in a easier to find way. But none of that was created specifically for Web Velocity. It was just extracted.
You're going to have ways of exchanging web components between different people using the system?
The back-end hookup that we were using here was just store. It was just hooked up to be very easy to use directly in the environment. But you could also push all those same things into the public store repository. I mean, they're just packages. It's not, when we say application, it's just trying to simplify the terminology for Web Velocity. It's nothing more than a Smalltalk package. And it could be versioned off in the public store repository. So I could come back over here, for instance, and I could find my, what I call it, I think I called it my blog server. So I could take this and I could go ahead and I could either directly in this environment, or if I wanted to take it into another image, all I'd have to do is save that as a file out or a parcel, open up some other image, version it into public store.
Just thinking that public store is kind of hard to find things in. It would be nice if there was a public repository for people in this environment to share with.
That's actually something we might consider as opening up a separate repository, yeah. That's probably a good idea.
That documentation extractor, is that also publicly available?
It's part of the tool set that comes with Web Velocity, and I think that's something that we'll probably be making available in general, yeah. I don't see any reason not to. Anything else? That was a question from one of the engineers, so you notice that I said no, there are no more questions.